Hello, I'm Troy Anderson, Executive Director of Officer Safety and Wellness at the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund. I am pleased to welcome you to today's program, Picking Up the Pieces: How Law Enforcement and Communities Rebuild After Mass Casualty Events. 25 years ago, the world watched as the community of Littleton, Colorado began to heal after two armed students entered Columbine High School and committed the deadliest school shooting in American history at that time. We watched as law enforcement responded to the shooting, as families grieved for their slain children, and as the community came together to build their new normal. In the 25 years since Columbine, the number of school shootings and other mass shooting events continue to rise at a startling rate across the nation. These events leave a lasting mark on the communities where they occur and the law enforcement officers who are called to respond to them. Today, you're going to hear from a panel of experts who will take the lessons that our communities and law enforcement agencies have learned since Columbine to make our communities safer and even prevent these tragedies before they occur. I'd like to turn it over to our moderator, Matthew Garcia, who is the Deputy Director of Officer Safety and Wellness Programs here at NLEOMF, and our esteemed panel for this timely discussion.
I would like to welcome our listeners and esteemed panelists to today's pivotal discussion, Picking Up the Pieces: How Law Enforcement and Communities Rebuild After Mass Casualty Events. It's an honor to be in the company of such distinguished professionals, each bringing their expertise to bear on this critical issue. I'm Matthew Garcia, Deputy Director of Officer Safety and Wellness Programs for the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund. In the wake of devastating tragedies, both law enforcement agencies and communities find themselves grappling with profound challenges. Today, we have the privilege of hearing from four individuals who have dedicated their careers to addressing these challenges head-on. Joining us, we have FBI Supervisory Special Agent John Skillstead, whose extensive experience in law enforcement provides a unique perspective on the evolution of response tactics in the face of mass casualty events. Dr. Eric Skidmore from the South Carolina Law Enforcement Assistance Program brings his expertise in mental health and trauma response, offering invaluable insights into the impact of such events on individuals and communities alike. Scarlett Lewis, founder of the Choose Love movement, shares her inspiring journey and advocacy to compassion and resilience in the aftermath of tragedy, highlighting the importance of community support and healing. And lastly, we are honored to have Peter Forcelli, retired Deputy Assistant Director from the U.S. Department of Justice, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. His expertise in firearms regulations and enforcement strategies will provide crucial context as we explore avenues for prevention and mitigation. Throughout our discussion today, we will delve into how response tactics have evolved over the years, the profound impact of these events on both law enforcement and communities, and most importantly, how we can come together to support one another in times of crisis. Thank you all for being with us today. John, I'd like to open with you, and I've had the pleasure of actually having quite a few conversations with you in regards to school shootings and the history of school shootings. Would you take us back to 1999 and how the response to Columbine has changed over the years?
Yeah, good morning. Thank you, Matt. Yeah, it's kind of hard to believe, but next week will be the 25th anniversary of the shooting at Columbine. And like we've talked before, you know, this was a phenomenon that began not with Columbine. There were previous mass killings, active shooter situations, but this was really the first that kind of spurred on this movement of individuals going in and committing mass homicide situations, especially in educational environments. Previously, we saw at the University of Texas in 1966, the school clock tower shooting there, which traumatized the country. And you know, back then, law enforcement didn't have SWAT teams. This was the event that caused law enforcement teams to be established. And so from 1966 to 99, that was pretty much the protocol as we were using these advanced tactics to try and mitigate and neutralize these individuals who were engaging in these types of behaviors. And so when the shooting at Columbine occurred, police had those standard procedures, standard operating procedures to go to the location, create a perimeter, make sure that SWAT was ready to go and engage with the shooter. But SWAT teams, they have their own protocols. Ideally, what you want to do is you want to try and engage or mitigate those situations without having to fire your weapon. And so the idea would be negotiation. And unfortunately, active shooters, they're not in the mindset of negotiations. They're looking to harm as many people as they can, as quickly as they can. So in retrospect, looking at that response, that was not the correct response, but we as law enforcement did not know anything different at the time. And ultimately, as a result of what happened at Columbine, law enforcement tactics did change and continue to change today.
And what's your current role with the FBI now in terms of how it relates to the studying and understanding of shootings and mass casualties?
So I'm currently assigned at FBI headquarters in the Office of Partner Engagement, the Violence Reduction Unit. And in that unit, our primary responsibility is researching incidents that occur around the country to determine whether they fit the criteria that we use to include them in our annual study of active shooter incidents. And to give you an idea, that it's a very simple definition. An active shooter is an individual actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people in a populated area. It's a very broad definition. Obviously, we have some things that we use to limit the number of these incidents, such as we're not looking at domestic violence type situations, crimes, other related type crimes, such as a robbery type situation, gang activity, drug transactional activity. So those are some of the things that we use to eliminate potential incidents. But we're looking at those traditional incidents that people look at. Someone is going into a school, a business, and deciding to kill or attempt to kill people for whatever particular reason. It may be a valid reason in their mind that, hey, they've done me wrong, or they've caused me some issues and I am basically retaliating against them. So we do the research on an annual basis. Our annual study should be coming out within the next couple of weeks. And we use that information to talk about not only the incidents, but also some other factors, types of weapons that these individuals are using, the number of casualties that occur, engagement by law enforcement, engagement by civilians as well as security personnel, and what those actions have done to try and mitigate or limit the number of casualties that occur. Additionally, with this information, we have a two-pronged approach as far as training. We train law enforcement in advanced tactics. We have a partnership with Texas State University with their ALERT program, which is an acronym for Advanced Law Enforcement Rapid Response Training, where we, in cooperation with Texas State University, provide free training to law enforcement officers around the country, around the globe, in tactics to respond to an active shooter incident. Additionally, we have training that we have developed for civilians. And this training is an awareness program. We're looking to give individuals information that they can use to develop plans to try and avoid these situations. But if they are faced with these situations, tactics that they can use to try and keep themselves and others safe. We use the premise of the run, hide, fight concepts. We go through those different options and let people know that, hey, you do not have to be a victim in this situation. You can survive these things, but what we are telling them are not absolutes. We do not know the particular situation they may find themselves in, but we have the ability to give them some direction, some ideas. Okay, if you're in this situation, you may want to incorporate this into your plan. So those are the broad parameters that we at the FBI do as far as related to active shooter incidents.
Thank you, John. Eric, you've done quite a bit of work over the years with law enforcement and helping officers who've been through a critical incident find a path to recovery, that new normal, if you will. Also identifying effective ways and solutions for dealing with some of the trauma and the experiences of law enforcement. You share with us about the work that you've done down in South Carolina and what you continue to do for law enforcement.
Sure. It's great to be here, Matt. Thank you so much for the invitation. So I have been working for the state police down here for the last 27 years. We started in the mid to late 90s with very traditional kind of peer support programs. I know not everyone uses the CISM model, but many public safety agencies do across the country, and we do. But we discovered as we did that work across our state, and our mission was to reach out to 4 state police agencies. We don't have one like Connecticut. We have a bunch of different state police agencies, plus 280 local agencies. So in this small state, we've got about 17,000 sworn officers, and that was the target population. And as we did our work with law enforcement specifically, we were doing the traditional forms of intervention, but we discovered after those forms of intervention were done, and our basic follow-up was done, we had officers that were still very stuck according to their own account, their own reaction to their incident. And of course, the traditional pathway was to refer them directly to clinical mental health for continued care. But I want to thank John and his agency, because what we did was, with the help of Dr. Roger Solomon, we reached to the FBI and we simply borrowed their model, which was the post-critical incident seminar. They started it in 1983, and this all now flash forward up to the year 2000, and we simply borrowed their model as a formal way to follow up with officers in our state who were expressing that sense of stuckness. So we've continued to do that. It's a 3-day model. We can talk more about it, but it is one of the best things that we do. And I'm proud to say there are 14 states in the union using this model, same model exactly now. Peter, the latest state to come on board is Florida, under the leadership of FDLE and the Florida Wildlife Sheriff's Association and Chiefs Association. And anyway, we continue to do the PCIS. We're up to number 56 in July of this year. We will do post-critical incident seminar number 56. I'm not quite sure when the Sandy Hook troopers came through, what number that was, but that's when we first met each other, Matt.
Yes, that was back in 2013. I believe that we first came through with a group of troopers from up here in Connecticut.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to believe that it's been that long, but it's been a while. So, and it's been great to know you and the work that you're doing for law enforcement.
Well,
And I
thank
keep running into officers from around the country, especially down south, that are very familiar with the PCIS program and the work that you continue to do.
And thank you. And one of the things I think is so important to point out, I don't know if this is one of your questions, but the philosophy of all the states involved in this FBI model, this PCIS program, is to make their slots, their seats available to any other state or any other federal agency that has need of this kind of service. So it's a wonderful thing. When we sit down in South Carolina, it's very likely we've got folks from 3 or 4 other states sitting with us.
Thank you. Scarlett, your world into advocacy, your jump into advocacy has a very, very touching beginning. And when John was talking about run, hide, fight, it made me think of Jesse and the story you tell, Jesse, and really what led you to create the Choose Love movement. If you would share for us how your organization really began, the origins of your organization and your mission.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Matt. And thanks everybody here for all that you do for trying to keep our kids safe in schools. It's the #1 most important thing. My journey into advocacy started on December 14th at the Sandy Hook tragedy, when my son Jesse was murdered alongside 19 of his first grade classmates and 6 educators. And I took a much different path than other people. First of all, during the shooting, speaking of run, hide, fight, Jesse actually called for his friends to run when the shooter had blown his way through the glass doors, made a left down the first grade hallway, by the way, that he attended himself. And when before he came back to his elementary school, a principal and guidance counselor were in a meeting with a parent on the right side of the hallway. He killed them when they came out of the room and went into Jesse's room. His gun ran out of bullets or jammed. And during the short delay, Jesse called to his friends to run, and he's credited with saving 9 of his classmates' lives, which is amazing. And so then the shooter killed everyone else remaining in the classroom, went to the second classroom and killed everyone there. And then when he heard approaching sirens, came back into Jesse's classroom and killed himself. So afterwards, I went back to my home and I found a message that Jesse had written on our kitchen chalkboard. He'd written 3 words, and they're behind me: nurturing, healing, love. And I really started to think about how we had handled this issue and many other societal issues up until this point. Sandy Hook had all the latest technology. They had just been through an active shooter drill 3 weeks before Jesse's murder. By the way, I remember, and this is a more recent memory, that Jesse had come up to me, I think a week before the shooting, and I was sitting having a glass of wine after dinner with my mom, and he had said, "Mom, what would I do if a shooter came into my school?" And just not really give it, because those kind of things don't ever happen to people like me. I said, "Run zigzag." And, never asked him why he asked that, or you would think that I would. And of course, he didn't take my advice, unfortunately, but 9 people are walking the earth because he told others to. But anyway, I was looking around, and there was so much polarization. And after the Sandy Hook shooting, you were either pro-gun or anti-gun. And I thought, wow, well, that's not going to solve this issue. Everything that we've done to this point hasn't been able to solve this issue. So I'm not going to lend my voice to an organization that, that really hasn't worked up until now. So I decided to take a different path. And I thought, gosh, if the shooter had actually felt good about himself, if he'd been able to give and receive nurturing, healing love, if he had had healthy connections, felt a sense of belonging, then the tragedy would never have happened, because people that feel good about themselves don't want to harm themselves or others. And I think somebody alluded to the fact that school shooters are oftentimes suicidal, and then suicidal ideation becomes homicidal, and they expect to die when they go in those schools. In fact, they want to die. So I took Jesse's message to heart, and I asked a doctoral professor how to amplify this in schools. And I created a curriculum, actually, that helps kids and big kids who are adults, by the way, if there's confusion with that, how to have the courage to face their difficulty, their struggles, their pain, their emotional pain in life. And it teaches this concept called post-traumatic growth, which is how we're born. We're born with wanting to grow through difficulty, wanting to learn from and be strengthened by it. That's what post-traumatic growth is. And yet, unfortunately, a lot of us, or some of us, get taken down by it personally, and we take down others with it. So the program is very unique in that it's the only one that's school-based that focuses on love and post-traumatic growth, giving kids the courage to face whatever difficulty is in their life and be able to thoughtfully respond with love through using courage, gratitude, forgiveness, and compassion. It's always the strongest response. And, it's called character and social and emotional learning. It is a proactive, preventative approach rather than a reactive approach and being a step behind. This actually addresses the grievance end of the pathway to violence, and hopefully can reduce and prevent the suffering before it leads to violence, substance abuse, mental illness, or what other escalating diseases of despair are around.
Thank you. And I know, looking at your website, you go into your 3 core qualities, also working with the social and emotional learning. And I want to dive into that as we go through our conversation today, because I think the work that you're doing there is really hitting it from a different side that can be very impactful. But also it helps too by empowering those particular communities, and ultimately we can draw, as a whole, because law enforcement makes up the community as well. But it strengthens both. So thank you for the work that you're doing. And Peter, you come to us from actually law enforcement on both the local side, even though local is the largest police department in the country. Your experience with NYPD. And then you went over to the federal side. If you would share with us your background as well as the work you're doing today.
Sure. Honored to be here amongst such fine people. Yeah, no, I spent 15 years with the NYPD. My first mass casualty incident was actually the Happy Land Social Club arson, which killed 87 people. And then, after I left the NYPD, I started with ATF in New York, and I managed to respond to and survive 9/11, lost 7 good friends on that day. And then later in my career with ATF, I managed to oversee the shootings that happened at Pulse nightclub. We helped identify how Omar Mateen acquired the firearms. The Fort Lauderdale airport shooting, which killed 5 people. And then later I supervised ATF's response to Parkland, the school shooting there. And, ATF's role in these things is to assist law enforcement. School shootings, mass shootings generally are rarely federal crimes. So our role is one of support. What I learned through responding to all these things, though, which I think is really important and why I'm so glad we're having this conversation, is as a first responder responding to these things, they leave a mark. They leave a mark on the first responders. They leave a mark on the community. They leave a mark on the teachers or the people who work at the facilities that are under attack during these instances. So I think it's important that the community and law enforcement come together to take care of one another when they go through one of these instances, but more importantly, to try to prevent them. So it's been interesting, like with ATF, our response generally is, like I said, to go there if there's still a tactical situation ongoing, to assist in any way we can. I can tell you in the Parkland shooting, for example, an off-duty ATF special response team member was amongst the first law enforcement officers to actually respond and go into the school to try to see if they can locate the shooter. By that time, the shooter, I won't name him because I don't think he deserves to be named, had fled. He'd gotten on a bus. So that's our first responsibility, is to end the threat. Then our second responsibility is to determine how did the individual who posed this threat or executed upon this threat acquire the firearms. That's ATF's area of expertise, is to trace that firearm. Then to look at what other firearms did they acquire in the past, if that's known, because there is no database, thanks to politics. So, and then where are those firearms now? Or is there another shooter that could be out there, perhaps looking at another site? And then obviously we then would work with our partners from the FBI and from local law enforcement to look back at that person's history, social media postings, interviewing folks who might know that person to see like what led to this happening, whether it's a mass shooting at a school or a mass shooting elsewhere. Obviously, there's a lot of emotion on both sides, but there's also a lot of times where there's things that lead up to indicators of why this shooting took place. But I think the other thing that we do that a lot of folks don't know is ATF has a very robust peer support program. They have a very robust chaplain program. They have a very good employee assistance program. In fact, their peer support program works in conjunction with the chaplain program and in conjunction with Johns Hopkins University. And what they do is they don't only go there to respond to treat law enforcement officers who responded to see if they would be willing to have conversation and to try to help them open up, but to also go out and speak to members of the community, members of local law enforcement who might not have a peer support program of their own. And we've come a long way, and not just ATF, law enforcement has come a long way, I would say, since Happy Land Social Club arson, where the general feeling was back in those days, and forgive me, suck it up, Buttercup, like there was no peer support. If you were law enforcement, you were expected to have this thick skin, this suit of armor that protected you from seeing look, when we see things, they leave scars. They were expected to just kind of be ignored and just move on. As time has progressed, we proactively look to have people engage in conversation with us. And you can't necessarily make them talk, but we would make them listen to what the peer support program has to offer. And even now, look, I'll be candid because I think it's important for folks to let the armor down. I didn't until 2018, right before the Parkland shooting, come to terms with the fact that I was dealing with PTSD from 9/11. So I had lung cancer, had my right lung removed as a result of that cancer. And, in looking at what my family was going through because of my trauma, I realized that I had come into the profession whole, but I was no longer whole. And I'm not talking about missing the lung. I'm talking about like emotionally because of what I had seen. So responding to Parkland took a real toll on me in that, like, I had come to terms with my own mortality, and that armor that we built up over the years, responding to these things again and again and again, that gallows humor, which isn't funny when you think about it in hindsight. Parkland hit me profoundly because I realized I'm looking at these children whose lives were taken to them and the coach who stepped up to try to defend those children at the same time that I was learning, that I myself was no longer invincible. So, but we've come a long way. And I really think when we talk about, look, a lot of this development that we've learned has been through mistakes made by law enforcement in response. But when it comes to mental health and wellness, I think it's important that we give credit to the military because there was a stigma that was attached to acknowledging that you have PTSD or survivor's guilt or any of those things in law enforcement for a long time. It's when the military folks coming back from theaters of war started to acknowledge that that was happening within their community, and they were very proactive in seeking help for their people, that law enforcement, I think, realized, wait a minute, if they can admit they have a problem, it's our turn. And I think we've come a long way in a very short time as a result of what we've seen, again, with the military and what we've learned from our own mistakes over the years.
Thank you. And I want to touch upon with the peer support, Eric, in the work that you've done through PCIS, are there common themes that you're seeing with officers who have responded to critical incidents such as mass shootings, school shootings, that they're coming forward with or struggling with afterwards?
Sure. I think the common themes are also the common themes we see in the day-to-day operations of law enforcement with officer-involved shootings, where chases, where people get killed, suicide of coworker, line of duty death. But I see I see officers who've responded specifically to those shootings, those mass casualties, like Virginia Tech. These are the ones in our wheelhouse, and the Mother Emanuel shooting here in Charleston, South Carolina. That one of the themes is the ones who have a system around them that believes in the wellness of the officer and sees the impact and takes seriously the impact of these incidents, they tend to do better because their command staff. I remember when Troy Anderson called me and said, the Connecticut State Police want to support the care of our officers, and we want to come to a post-critical incident seminar. So that's a positive theme where you see these commanders. Now, if the commanders don't take this seriously and say, as Peter said, suck it up, buttercup, that's going to be very difficult. After Virginia Tech, I think we saw a lot of officers from some of the departments leave, not the Blacksburg Police Department, but some of the other surrounding departments that responded to the campus. And I think it, like Peter was talking about with 9/11, I mean, in many ways, it boils down to the exposure that people had to the incident itself. So we see a lot of struggles with addiction, particularly alcohol. We see a lot of relationship issues. We see a lot of anger issues. We see a lot of just folks thinking about getting out of the business. And we need to do everything we can to reach out to them to help them stay in if they can.
I want to touch upon, John, you had mentioned some of the programs that the FBI does, and Eric, in tying into what you're talking about, right? Officers can be extremely critical of their own actions, and with sort of a self-review, and empowering officers through training. I know that the FBI and John, you had mentioned about the alert program. By empowering officers how to respond and ensuring that there is training out there for officers, so that when they do respond, that they can at least be sure that they've been given the tools to respond appropriately. Now, every situation is different, but Eric, when you are talking with officers, do they go back to the role that training played in their response? And does that training, when it's done right, help with the overall recovering or acceptance of the incident that happened?
Yes, I think they do go back to their training. And I think they, the ones who seem to do better, are the ones that have some knowledge about the impact of hellacious critical incidents on normal human beings. They don't deny it. They've been through some training where they say, there's emotional impact, there's psychological impact, there's physical impact, there's spiritual impact. So yes, I think those officers who've been through that training, even at a basic level. Now, of course, they'll say in the academy, I learned some of these things, but until I was involved in that fatal shooting, I didn't really understand what you were talking about. But now I get it. I can't emphasize enough the importance of the command staff to take this wellness piece very seriously. So critical.
Can I add to that for a second?
Yes, Peter.
Sure. And you bring up a good point. After the shooting that happened at Fort Lauderdale Airport, and then after the shooting that happened in Parkland, ATF's peer support program was designed to be voluntary. And the stance that was taken by the agency was you can't force somebody to go and speak to peer support. We made a decision after those incidents, because the people that responded were profoundly impacted. Like one of my agents, former special forces guy, by the way, he was on the other side of airport security when his daughter was, present. He had dropped her off to get on a flight. when the shooting happened. So he was very worried about his daughter's safety. And here's a guy who was a former Green Beret, not the kind of person that you would think would get rattled. Similarly with Parkland, when folks responded from our special response team, these are your alpha types, we mandated that they show up, which ATF was originally against. You don't have to talk to peer support, but you're going to show up. And then what we did was we had the command staff speak first about how they were affected. I was among them, my 2 assistant special agent charges as well. We felt that opened the door for others to realize, wait a minute, if they can talk, I can talk. And I had folks thank me later for doing that exactly. So now they're doing that more often. But I think to your point, I think you're entirely correct. If the command staff does not break that ice, then, or if they feel that the folks are going to be judged for seeking help, then folks won't seek help, which is really detrimental to the agency and to the individual. So kudos for bringing that up. Thank you.
John, can you tell us more about your alert program and how that prepares officers to handle these situations? And if during that training there's any tie-in to peer support or how to reach out for help afterwards?
Yeah, so the alert program is, like I had mentioned before, is advanced law enforcement rapid response training, in which we bring together local, state, federal officers in the same environment, because typically in these situations, you're going to have a response from individuals who work for different agencies. You may not be on the same training platform. So that's why we bring them together to have a baseline understanding of what the response is going to be. And with that, one of the things that we see occur through that is that muscle memory. You may never have been through an active shooter incident, or you may never experience one. But if you do, you at least have an idea or a sense of, okay, these are the steps, these are the procedures that are going to occur. These are the things that I need to keep in mind as I try and stay safe myself, as I'm trying to identify, locate, and neutralize that shooter. Obviously, the impact that it's going to have on individuals is going to be far-ranging. Some are able to deal with things much, much easier than others, but there is going to be an impact. There is not specifically a wellness aspect to the alert program at this point. Obviously, we have resources through the FBI that we share and provide to communities, law enforcement agencies to effectively deal with those situations. And again, I know we're talking about the impact on law enforcement, but we also need to talk about those people who may not necessarily be those immediate responders, dispatchers, evidence response personnel, victim assistance personnel. They are going to be impacted as well, and we need to include those individuals in the programs that we are advocating.
Scarlett, your community was a small community, Newtown, and I've always said if there's a postcard that represents a small New England town, it would be a picture of Newtown, and a very tight community. With your program beginning and having its roots within that environment, you then carried your program, and a key component of it is that social and emotional learning. Can you tell us more about that component of it, as well as the results you've seen, the impact that you have personally seen, because you have taught this throughout the country. It's not just a local movement anymore.
Yeah, so Choose Love and our programming is now in every state and about 14,500 schools and 120 countries. So this is all by word of mouth and referral, which is really amazing. And it teaches essential life skills. It teaches skills, tools, and attitudes that we really aren't born with. And it was amazing to me that at 44 years old, when I was looking for a different way to solve the problem, a proactive, preventative approach to reduce the suffering that leads to what we're seeing, I realized I didn't have these skills and tools myself. I was 44 years old. My parents hadn't taught me. I didn't learn it in school, and I worked my entire life, and I got to be a parent of 2 children and loved them very much, but I couldn't give what I didn't have. And when I'm talking about social and emotional learning, character education, mindfulness, I'm talking about how to have healthy relationships. I'm talking about self-awareness, being aware of what I'm feeling and having the ability to feel better. I'm talking about internal fortitude to handle difficulty. I'm talking about resilience. I'm talking about social awareness. How am I coming across to you? I'm talking about having a purpose in life or assigning appropriate meaning to difficult things that happen in our lives. I mean, these are all things that we have to learn, and we can get to be adults and we don't have them. And I'm living proof of that. But the amazing thing is we can teach kids, very young kids, and we can fortify with them with this. And the research behind this is incredible. It shows that kids get better grades and test scores, higher attendance, and less stress and anxiety, less mental health issues. And then it's followed them into adulthood where they have less substance abuse, less incarceration, less mental illness, even less divorce rates, which is where I say, see, I could have benefited from this. So it was really incredible. It was eye-opening to me, and I couldn't believe with the importance of this and my feeling that this would have saved my son's life. And not only those kids, but also the ones perpetrating the crimes, because clearly those people are hurt people hurting other people. And if they could manage their pain, they absolutely, if they knew they had a choice and another way, they wouldn't be doing what they were doing. So really important that we understand also that this just isn't for kids, that I have trained law enforcement and first responders kind of all over, but especially, New Hampshire is an incredible example of what can happen. The Governor Sununu, and Perry Plummer, his head of the Department of Homeland Security, came to hear me speak, and they realized they were just working on their statewide school safety initiative. By the way, they were the first state to put that out there. And they thought, wow, gosh, we've been focusing on the attack end, and we understand the importance of addressing the other end, the grievance end. Wow, we could actually give kids the skills and tools they need to manage these hard feelings, these hurts, so that it doesn't escalate. And so they actually wrote the Choose Love movement into their statewide school safety initiative. They hired my ambassador that was actually just a volunteer at the time because she wanted to get this into her son's school. And she worked out of Governor Sununu's office to try to get this into as many schools as possible. Now in New Hampshire, it's for foster parents, it's for law enforcement, it's in the Department of Health and Human Services. We've actually been taught in all the jails, in the Department of Corrections for years now. They are leaders in this, and now it's trickling down to other states, which is really exciting. But it's something that I can tell you changed my life, especially after what I had been through, the tragedy and trauma of having my young son murdered, to be able to learn these skills and tools that help me take my personal power back and then use what I've learned to help other people. I did this all through the programming that the Choose Love movement teaches, and it's pretty amazing. It's a universal language, so it's really something that the inmates can talk to with their kids, which is absolutely incredible. But they're the same skills and tools that we all need to help us live our best lives.
How has the training impacted law enforcement? You mentioned that you've trained law enforcement. How has been the buy-in from law enforcement? And how has it impacted, especially if you can talk to the school resource officers, right, that are dealing with this very population? They're the ones that are going to see it firsthand within the schools. Can you share with us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So school resource officers are our strongest advocates because they know the power of proactive prevention. And so a lot of times they're the ones that bring it to the schools, and then they're the ones that help teach it, through the languaging, help promote it, help keep it going in the hallways. It's a great way for them to make connections with the kids. We have an incredible, you asked me for an example. We have an incredible man in New Hampshire. His name is Lenny O'Keefe. He has the first Choose Love comfort dog, but he worked in the prison system for 20 years. He retired. He's now part of the Concord Police Department, and he is a first responder. He has Liberty, his comfort dog, and they go to fires in the middle of the night where the home is burned down and there are kids that are very traumatized. He goes into a school when they have some sort of alert, or maybe think that there's a lot of swatting incidents now where schools will go into lockdown because of a call from overseas. So nobody knows if it's actually happening or not. And so Lenny and his dog will go in and he'll talk about all the things that he says he's learned from Choose Love. And he is much better able, he says, to help the kids deal with these difficult situations and then feel better. I always say I love talking about emotional wellness because I'm talking about feeling better. And wouldn't it be amazing if we all had some skills and tools that would help us do that in every situation?
I've had the opportunity to work with Safe Leo, Suicide Awareness for Law Enforcement, and meet officers from around the country. And we're seeing more comfort dogs being used on peer support teams, part of wellness programs. Pete and Eric, are you seeing that as well? So for Pete, is that something that's been made part of the ATF peer support program, or at least while you were there? And I know you've been retired, and it's sort of a new evolution within the approach to peer support. But for both of you, have you seen more of that coming now through your respective fields?
I know ATF contemplated it back in 2020. I don't know if they've ever pulled the trigger on it. I do think it's a great idea. Obviously it's worked for other communities, but I'm not sure if they've implemented it within ATF.
So Matt, I'm seeing a growth in that area. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. I'm seeing an increase of the use of therapy dogs. Of course, the military has been leading the way in this. We've got a huge military presence in our state. But I tell you where I really saw it was I went to this was in Atlanta a couple years ago, the IACP wellness conference, and the number of therapy dogs that were present at the conference just stunned me. They were folks walking those canine therapy dogs everywhere. I had a major in the state police call me the other day and say, listen, I want to present this to the chief about securing a therapy dog. And I just want to be sure you're good with that. And I said, I'm absolutely good with it. So yes, there is an increase, more and more and more. I see it in some specialty units like ICAC units in sheriff's offices, where their exposure to horrific internet crimes against children, they're trying everything they can to work on wellness with those folks exposed to it.
John, what does the data tell us in terms of school shootings?
Well, it's still a troubling environment out there. Whether they're active shooter incidents or criminal activity that occurs on campus, there's still way too much that is occurring on campuses. And I want to go back to what Scarlett was saying, and I applaud you for the efforts that you've made. That's one of the things that we specifically highlight in our training of civilians, is developing that community. that community involvement. And you mentioned about perpetrators that, hey, we're needing to focus in on getting to them before these tragic events and so forth. And what we're seeing a lot, and I don't want to get out into the behavioral side of it too much, but what we're seeing, of course, is a lot of these perpetrators are individuals who feel marginalized, who don't feel like they're a part of the community, and so they have no responsibility to the community. Whereas if we're building these communities, these schools, and having that positive outlook and mindset, it's very difficult for someone to think about, why would I want to harm someone that I love or that I have a connection with? And Scarlett, your programs have been fantastic, and it's just the bottom of the barrel. We need to expand this in all walks of life, whatever we're doing. And it's interesting when we provide this training to civilians, people nod their head and everything and say, oh yeah, I knew, there was that kid in school that I grew up with, and you were told not to engage with him because he's different. But the only reason they're different is because you don't know them. Talk to them, reach out to them. And when we do these trainings, we reach out to people. Of course, we don't necessarily know the people in the audience, and we just introduce ourselves, and you can see the smile on their face, the brightness that comes to their eyes. And it's like, hey, I've met someone new. It may not solve all the problems or challenges that someone has, but it kind of breaks down those barriers. And I think that can have a positive effect, not only in schools, but our communities as well. And getting back to your point, Matt, about schools, we're seeing about the same number of incidents that we consider a part of our study, fairly consistent over the years. But numbers don't tell the story. The numbers are inconsequential to the impact that it has, not only on the people who are physically affected, but how do those students, how do those families deal with things moving forward? It could be a friend of yours who has been harmed. You may have not had any particular involvement in even knowing a student or an educator or a parent who's been harmed, yet it's going to affect you. And we've got to understand that this is a whole community issue. It's not a law enforcement issue. It's not a school issue, but we all have to take up that flag and say, hey, we're not going to allow that to happen. We want to try and make those people better. And the whole point of what we do in those exercises is being able to recognize that individuals may have challenges or issues that are different than we have. And a lot of times what they're doing is a cry for help. So what we advocate, of course, is if you observe troubling or disturbing behaviors, we want you to see something, say something, do something, and kind of get over that stigma of saying, hey, I'm reporting on someone, thinking that every incident is going to turn into a law enforcement action where someone is going to jail. That is not always the case. And in reality, we don't want that to have to be the case if we can help it. We want to get that person the attention, the help that they need so that they can be a productive member of the community.
Mm-hmm. Scarlett, what can law enforcement do better after a school shooting for bridging any gaps between law enforcement and the residents that are impacted by a school shooting?
Well, I will say I thought that Connecticut did a great job in the aftermath. They actually assigned a state trooper to each of the families. And, our state trooper became part of our family. and traveled with us every day for the first few months, came to the funeral. We rode around in his car because, of course, Sandy Hook was just loaded with the media and people who were visiting to look at the memorial and things like that. So there was also, other elements saying that the tragedy didn't happen. There were curiosity seekers. And so to have that state trooper with us, we felt safe. And that's the number one most important thing. I think that I really loved that whole component of it. And I know probably not every state is able to do that, but I thought that that was wonderful. And then, we received regular updates throughout the year of investigation. And I thought they did a really great job of giving us regular updates. And I really can't think of any sort of criticism that I have. I thought that they did a really good job, but I did want to add on to what he was saying, that there's such an importance of everyone's involvement and the understanding that whoever is perpetrating this crime is hurt. And when we see that hurt in someone else, it does take a tremendous amount of courage to address that. But part of what I'm trying to do is make people realize that, when people do things like this, it is coming from a point of pain. And that's a hopeful statement, because there's always something that we can do to help another person who's hurting. There's almost always multiple cries for help that are missed. And even in the Sandy Hook school case, I mean, he obviously was a very troubled young man, but when he was in 5th grade, he wrote a handwritten book and brought it to school. It was called The Book of Granny. And a child, 5th grader, he was in 5th grade, came to school, a witch came to school in this book with a broomstick. The broomstick opened into a semi-automatic weapon, and this witch murdered children. And of course, it was turned in and nothing was ever done to it. So you can imagine handing that to somebody, anybody, and having absolutely no response. I mean, I think the 3 things that kids want, and by the way, I've spoken to school shooters and people think I'm a little nuts for doing that, but I want to speak directly to them and see where we made mistakes, because they're born, and they are not born school shooters, mass murderers, suicidal. So they get to, becoming a school shooter. It's like, what happened during that time from here to here, and what could we have done better? So I've interviewed many of them. Even I have a former school shooter that's an ambassador for me in New York. Because I do believe in redemption, and I do believe that people can learn and change and grow from mistakes. I feel like that's how we all grow. And I will tell you that and this was brought up previously too, and it's correct. They all say that they didn't feel seen. They didn't feel seen. So everybody wants to be safe, everyone wants to be seen, and everybody wants to be celebrated, of course. But these individuals didn't feel seen. And I think that that's something that we can take away and do better at, to actually see the individuals who are invisible because of their pain, or because we're afraid of them, afraid to address their need. Even my older son, so a surviving sibling that went back into school, no one ever asked him about his brother. Nobody ever mentioned his brother's name, and nobody, he got help, but there was no dialogue about what had happened. And when I asked later why, this is after he graduated, feeling disconnected and really not a part of the community in the high school, they said, well, we didn't want to remind him. If he was doing good, we didn't want to remind him, so we weren't going to say anything. And if he wasn't doing well, then we were afraid that we didn't have the necessary skills and tools. And of course, the lesson that we take away is, It's not about having the professional skills and tools when you see somebody in pain. It's about having the courage to be present with them. You don't even have to say anything, but to acknowledge that you see them in pain and ask what you can do. And evidently that takes a lot of courage, especially in today's world where, where school shootings, they don't just impact that community. They impact everyone, because we've got body cam footage now of the school shooters. We have smartphones with 2 tickets to the worst of humanity in our back pocket 24/7. So we're all impacted, and everybody has a little bit of fear. And that's why it's so important, and I'll end with this, that we all have the skills, tools, and awarenesses that we need to be able to choose love over that fear.
You make the comment of being able to see the worst of humanity, and one of the things that I talked about in as far as understanding for officers, right? Each individual officer has a reason why we do this job. What's your why? We'll say, and mine has shifted over the years, but given the fact that there's going to be horrible things that happen, right? That we're going to be privy to within law enforcement. The looking for the best of humanity, so seeing the best come out of bad situations really is so important, at least for me, right, to help keep me grounded when I was on the job, and remind me why ultimately we do what we do. And you talked about the family liaison program, and that was not something that Connecticut State Police had in place at the time, and it proved immensely valuable during Sandy, just because of the sheer number of families that were involved and putting people in place. And I've always said this, I was surprised and impressed with the connections that were made, the fit, if you will, right? Because it was done in response. It wasn't a team already in place. So it was done in a response. And I was so impressed by the fit, because so many families did have similar experiences to what you're talking about, where there was that bond, that connection that was made. Eric, do you see with your teams, because in PCIS you have an entire peer support team that assists with the PCIS, and are you seeing within those teams, just within the peer teams from the various agencies that take part, an increase or training specifically to act as a family liaison in times like this? Or is that still an area where there needs to be growth?
I think it's an area there still needs to be growth. It's an emerging area. And my administrative assistant for many years, she was the mother of a state trooper who was murdered. And that was back in '92, Miss Coates, who you met. And she talked about the trooper that was assigned to her. Now, maybe in the state police system like you come out of, there's already in the culture the assignment of a trooper to a fallen trooper's family. And I don't know if that's where the idea comes from with Sandy Hook, but I think it's emerging. I think that's a wonderful intersection between public safety and the family. It's like Scarlett's family. But more of that, more is better. And how to do that work well, how for the command staff to enter, to pull folks in and out, so you care for the officer's exposure as well. Can I say a word, Matt, about chaplains?
Absolutely.
I don't want to get us off track. So 48 hours ago, I was sitting in the room at Mother Emanuel Church, where 9 parishioners were murdered in a Bible study. And I was there because I was talking to the pastor about a mass casualty training for chaplains. I'm part of the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab, a national group that works on all kinds of different chaplains based at Brandeis University. Over and over again, I hear whatever kind of chaplaincy program it is, one of the big issues is money. There's just not the money to train chaplains, whether it's in the prison or in the hospital or for NASCAR or whatever it is. And our leadership in the chaplain corps gets hung up on the fact that the money's not there. We've been blessed. We're in a relationship with Lenore Ryan University in North Carolina, and have an 18-month public safety chaplaincy training program. And next month, we will have a mass casualty field trip to Charleston for the Mother Emanuel 9. And some folks know we lost 9 firefighters in one terrible sofa superstore fire. So anyway, if there's something I could say to leadership around the country, if you have a chaplaincy program in your agency, if you believe in it, it's an intersection with your community, consider putting the funds necessary towards that to train chaplains and possibly bringing a full-time chaplain on your staff to coordinate the program and to work hand in hand with the peer team, like Pete was saying, and the mental health professionals. That's the way I think about public safety chaplaincy, like a stool that has 3 legs: peers, chaplains, mental health professionals.
I would just like to add that I think more money does need to be dedicated to proactive prevention. There's the attack end of the pathway to violence has become a billion-dollar industry. But the fact of the matter is we can reduce and prevent this by addressing the social and emotional competence of children and adults. And I just want to say that Sue Klebold, who is the mom of Dylan Klebold, who was one of 2 of the Columbine shooters, she's kind of been out there with a TED Talk and a book, as well as a documentary detailing her last 20 years of her journey into trying to figure out why her son did what he did and how it could have been prevented. And that documentary ends in a classroom where she says, hey, I've finally figured this out after my decades of searching. I've found the solution, and it's called social emotional learning and mindfulness. So Sue and I have spoken, and here you have 2 moms from opposite ends of the spectrum agreeing on a solution. And I really do think that we need to focus on that proactive preventative piece. It's not a fire that needs to be put out, but actually can help put out the fires as well. But we can stop the fires from even starting.
I've seen her TED Talk, and it's important to hear from her side too, because she offers a very unique perspective. But in terms of the advocacy and the work that you're doing, and the impact that it's having within the school system and the officers that you're training, and all of that goes to empower, right? It goes to empower the students, the teachers, the law enforcement officers. Eric and Pete, in your work with peer support teams, how important is it to empower officers themselves with understanding what they will potentially face, right? And also understanding how to deal with the various issues that impact law enforcement. So the role of empowerment in healing.
Oh, it's critically important. And look, we push on our folks now. It's okay to not be okay. It's not okay to not ask for help. The other thing someone mentioned earlier was resilience training. That's a new thing in the law enforcement community. Like, to get past these things, to understand that, yeah, you may be damaged, you may have scars from what you've seen, but that it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to ask a colleague, hey, do you need help? And to push past it. And look, if you need to ask for help from mental health professionals, from peer support programs, from the chaplains, those are now available in a lot more organizations than they were 10 years ago. So it's critically important to understand that, look, no matter what you've endured, you can push through that. You can seek help. There's no shame in doing that, and that you actually should be encouraged to do exactly that. Because look, we're all members of the community. You know, the suspect is a member of the community. Law enforcement officers responding to these incidents are members of the community, and obviously the victims and the victims' families are members of one larger community. So it's important that we all pull together. But resilience is just a critical part of that. So I'm glad someone mentioned that earlier.
It really is. And I'll just add that when I was at the firehouse, so the protocol that day at Sandy Hook was that the parents would come and pick up their kids at the firehouse. That was the reunification point. Then that was the start of where the school was at the end of the cul-de-sac. And they had just had an active shooter drill. That's where they went. So I got there. Obviously, we weren't told what had actually happened until late afternoon. So we waited hours. And if I had a criticism, it's probably that. While they identified the bodies, we were told that all the kids are hiding and it's going to take us a while to find them. And of course, I believed that. I wanted to believe it anyway. But my thoughts, as anybody's would, went to worst case scenario as I was waiting. And all I knew was PTSD, because everybody's heard of PTSD. So I thought, wow, I am going to, if you know, this doesn't work out and Jesse's dead, I am going to suffer from PTSD. And then I thought, I wonder what that's going to look like. I will probably be institutionalized. And then who's going to take care of my younger son? You know, fear. And because I didn't know that there was an alternative, how would I have known that that actually, as human beings, we're designed to grow through difficulty? And so that wasn't even a possibility for me at that time. And with my research, I came to find this out and then actually experience post-traumatic growth myself. But I think it's so important that we give police officers this understanding that, yes, there is, you know, and I have, of course, some PTSD as well, but I've also experienced extreme post-traumatic growth, and we can give it to each other through our stories. It's called vicarious post-traumatic growth, and it's really powerful, really powerful.
It's so important to hit this from multiple facets, that you know, with the work that you're doing, Scarlett, and then as far as keeping officers healthy so that when they are engaging with the community, right, they're not coming, that anger or resentment doesn't build up, but that there's a mutual respect for one another. So I want to, as we've had a fantastic conversation addressing this. I want to put this out there to you as we come to the end of our program here. I'll ask each one of you, how does your role help to rebuild after a mass casualty, right? So how does your role help for law enforcement to rebuild and to move on, to strengthen not just the officers, but also their relationships with the community? Eric, I'll point to you first.
Sure. Thank you. I one of the blessings of what we do in South Carolina is the fact that the leadership 27 years ago said, we're going to put you in this position. It's going to be a partnership between the state police. We're going to share the cost. It's going to be available to every local law enforcement agency in the state. And the blessing, how I think about that is the fact that we get to think about it all the time, meaning this is our mission, is the wellness of officers, non-sworn staff, and their family members. And I think that's how, at a basic level, that's part of the secret sauce, that we're assigned to this mission all the time. It's not a secondary or tertiary duty. It's what we do.
If someone listening today is interested in reaching out, how do they get in touch with you?
Sure.
Or with an organization?
Yes, they're welcome to just go to our website, scleap.org, and all my contact information is there. And you and Anna are welcome to put it on your website. But we want to share the word about the PCIS and wellness and what's working, what we've seen work.
Thank you. Pete, through peer support, your experience with peer support and also drawing upon your experience with NYPD and ATF, how does peer support help officers rebuild after a mass casualty?
Well, it's critically important because you're hearing from folks who walked the same path that you've walked. I mean, in our peer support program, generally, like if someone's diagnosed with cancer, they're going to be partnered up to have a peer who's had cancer, who survived it, speak to them. So like someone who's walked in their shoes. The other thing is, you know, for family members, our peer support program will liaise with family. Our EAP was designed to also liaise with the officer and their family. Same thing with NYPD, had a very, very robust network to deal with the officers and the family. That's the same thing, chaplaincy program, an employee assistance program, and the peer support program. So, I mean, these are just very, very important networks to work within law enforcement communities. And like the other thing we say, like I spoke last week at the 9/11 Memorial Museum on resilience. Look, it's absolutely perfect to give an organization, if you're an officer, 100% of your effort, but do not give them 100% of your time. Part of the problems I see in law enforcement is people who don't unplug, right? Their whole community revolves around law enforcement. Their job becomes their identity. And it's so important for us to remind people that, look, you're a human being. You're a brother, sister, father, I mean, whatever your role is. So take care of yourself, then take care of your family. And if you're doing those things effectively, then you can take care of your duties effectively. So again, it's important that folks look at themselves as human beings, not just part of some machine.
Yeah, and you've tapped into that yourself because you, as you alluded to in the beginning, dealing with 9/11 cancer and just the incidents that you've been through. So you speak from experience on that.
Well, and I want to say something for your listeners. I knew I had something wrong with me for over a decade, and I didn't have the courage to come forward. And, you know, I missed out on some great opportunities with family, you know. So what I would say is don't be me. Learn from my mistake. If you think that you need help or you need, get it. Don't sit in your chair with the TV on, not watching what's on TV, not listening to your family when they call your name. Get that help. So, and I think that's an epidemic in law enforcement where people take the problems home, they bounce them around in their head. You know, they remain too much inside their own mind that they're not asking for help. And they're also not paying attention to their friends, family, and to the important things in life, because a job is just a job. When you retire, they'll replace you and, you know, someone else will take that job and the organization's going to move on. So be a good member of the community, good member of your family, and most importantly, take care of yourself.
You're spot on with that, Pete. Thanks for bringing that up. Scarlett, what's in the future for Choose Love?
Well, during COVID, my mom donated an RV and we wrapped it in student artwork, and Governor Sununu gave us a grant. We went all throughout New Hampshire. I've been throughout Connecticut and all the way to Texas and Florida. So the future is just getting the word out about these programs for schools, homes, communities, and beyond, and all the research that shows that this works. I talked about how kids, you know, have lower behavioral issues. It's a statistically effective way to deal with bullying rather than the anti-bullying programs in place. And there's just so much research beyond this to show that the impact, the tremendous impact on society. And I just wanted to, I pulled up this study to share in the American Journal of Public Health. It followed 800 children over 20 years, and they followed, you know, they looked at their social skills, and they found for every 1 point increase in a child's social competency score in kindergarten, they were twice as likely to obtain a college degree and 46% more likely to have a full-time job by the age of 25. Conversely, for every 1 point decrease in a child's social skill score in kindergarten, they had a 67% higher chance of having been arrested in early adulthood, 67% higher chance, a 52% higher rate of binge drinking, and an 82% higher chance of being in or on a waiting list for public housing. So you see how this is tremendously important for the individual, but also for society as a whole. Giving these essential life skills. This is why our programming is no cost, because I knew that this would have saved my son's life, and it can reduce and prevent so much suffering. And it is a way to bring schools, homes, communities together, because it's a universal language and everybody's on the same page. It promotes relationships, connection, and belonging. And so I just continue, I have a couple of books, couple more books in the works, and just continue promoting this in the US and around the world.
Thank you. What's the best way for an agency or a school or a community to get in touch with you if they want to bring your program to those within their community?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. It's going to our website, which is chooselovemovement.org, and clicking the contact button, and we will get right back to you. We love hearing from people.
Great. John, I know that the FBI has so many different resources out there to help agencies in the wake of a mass casualty or school shooting. What is the best way to get in touch with the agency, and also what are some of those key components for the recovery?
So Matt, the best way to get a hold of the FBI obviously is to contact the individual field office that would cover your community. Reach out to them, reach out to the community outreach specialist there. They can be kind of that first line, and they can direct or get you in touch with the individuals or personnel that you would need to contact. Whatever situation it may be, reporting crime, seeking help, anything like that. And as far as resources go, Matt, anytime such, one of these situations occurs, it's a huge drain on resources for a community. And I think I mentioned this before when you and I talked, is that for a community, while it's a very traumatic situation and is going to impact them on a continuing basis, an active shooter incident in law enforcement terms is really just one call for service. These communities still have the other crime problems, crime issues that they have to deal with, and they have to respond because they have citizens that they have to respond to and take care of. And so we've seen this in a lot of these situations where other local communities reach out and are able to help the affected community. One example we talked about last time you and I got together was the police shooting in Dallas a number of years ago. And as it turns out, Dallas is a very large municipality with a lot of officers, and they wanted to take care of their own. They wanted to do the crime scene investigation for all of those officers who were mortally wounded, and they felt they owed it to their own personnel. And after a period of time, they realized that, hey, we can't do that as well as the work for the civilians in our community. And so they reached out, and one of the things that we at the FBI had available to them was our evidence response teams. We brought in teams from around the country to assist in processing those scenes. Obviously, we have Victim Services Division that can help out with wellness, with the recovery, with victims. There's just a large number of different resources. And it's not like back in the day when when I started law enforcement, when you only had a few aspects or a few areas that you should be concerned with when you're conducting an investigation. Now with the advances in technology, we have cyber teams that are a part of typical normal investigations that we do, whether they're white collar crime cases or violent crime cases, bank robbery cases, or kidnappings. We're using cyber technology to help us out in solving those crimes. And so what I can sum up and say is we've got a lot of resources that we're willing to provide. And all we ask for a community is reach out and just say, please help us out, and we're going to be there for you. That's our mandate. That's what we do. And again, we're looking to try and help the community process this and become better for it after this ends up happening.
Thank you. I want to thank the four of you for being a part of today's panel discussion, and also for the work that you're doing. It's the investment of your time, the investment of your overall health and well-being for something much larger than yourselves, and the impact that it's having on the community. Scarlett, thank you so much for the work that you're doing and for taking, for turning Jesse's story into something that can be shared around the country and continue to have an effect and impact communities. And Pete, thank you so much for joining us with your stories, the peer support, as well as your own personal story. You truly speak from an area of firsthand experience. Eric, and having first met you back in 2013, and for all of the work that you're doing with law enforcement officers throughout the country. And I was just down in Columbia not too long ago, and I must have come across half a dozen officers within that particular training that were not only familiar with PCIS, but couldn't speak positively enough about the program and the impact that it's had on them. So thank you. And John, for all of the work that you're doing there in the FBI, thank you so much, and for bringing to attention all of the resources that are out there, because when an incident happens, it can overwhelm smaller communities. So knowing that there's an agency to lean on for help, and that there is a solution out there. So thank you, all four of you. It's been an honor and a privilege to get an opportunity to talk with you, and I thank you, and hopefully our paths will cross again somewhere in the future.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to today's program, Picking Up the Pieces, How Law Enforcement and Communities Rebuild After Mass Casualty Events. I'd like to extend a special thank you to our esteemed panelists for taking the time to share their expertise with us during such a timely and important discussion. If you enjoyed today's program and would like to learn more about the National Law Enforcement Museum's programming, please visit our website at www.nleomf.org/museum/public programs. There you will find our back page of public programs, which cover various topics related to law enforcement, as well as resources, speaker bios, and more. We thank you again for tuning in today. Stay safe, and we hope to see you next time.